In 2004, Saw was a tiny independent horror film that crawled out of obscurity and rewired the entire genre almost overnight. It was shot in under 3 weeks inside a grimy warehouse most people would never notice driving past, using props that were barely safer than the traps you see on screen. Studios didn't want it. The budget was microscopic. The cast had no idea it would become a cultural phenomenon, and yet somehow it exploded into one of the most profitable horror franchises in film history. Today, on Iconic TV Rewind, we expose 20 disturbing facts behind one of cinema's most shocking horror films. Fact number 1. This $1 million horror movie accidentally became a $100 million monster. The film was operating on a shoestring budget of roughly $1 to $1.2 million, an amount that barely covers catering on a modern studio blockbuster. The crew was small, the equipment was limited, and every department had to stretch resources far beyond what most productions would ever attempt. Sets were reused, lighting setups were simplified, and creative shortcuts weren't a luxury. They were survival. What makes this even more unbelievable is what happened after release. Against every expectation, Saw connected with audiences in a way few films ever do. Word spread quickly, repeat viewing surged, and the movie began outperforming far bigger releases in packed theaters. By the end of its theatrical run, Saw had earned over $100 million worldwide, transforming a tiny independent gamble into one of the most profitable horror successes of the decade. That kind of return is almost unheard of, especially for a debut film from first-time filmmakers working without studio muscle behind them. Fact number 2, they shot this entire movie in less than 3 weeks. If the budget wasn't stressful enough, the production schedule pushed the crew to the absolute edge. Saw was filmed in approximately 18 days, which is an incredibly short window for a feature film of any genre, let alone one filled with complex lighting setups, makeup effects, and carefully choreographed performances. Every day on set became a race against the clock. Scenes had to be captured quickly, adjustments were made on the fly, and there was very little room for error. The tight schedule forced the filmmakers to embrace a raw, gritty visual style that matched the story's brutal tone. Shadows became heavier, camera movements became more urgent, and imperfections were allowed to remain because there simply wasn't time to polish everything. In many ways, the frantic energy you feel while watching Saw mirrors exactly what the cast and crew were experiencing behind the camera. Instead of smoothing out the rough edges, the filmmakers leaned into them, creating a tense, claustrophobic atmosphere that ended up becoming one of the film's defining strengths. Fact number 3. Almost every scene you see was built inside one abandoned warehouse. To keep costs down and logistics simple, most of Saw was constructed inside a single warehouse space at the Lacey Street production facility in Los Angeles. Rather than traveling between multiple locations, entire sets were built inside the same massive industrial building, including the filthy bathroom, police interiors, hallways, and various other environments. Walls were moved, redressed, and repurposed constantly, sometimes multiple times a day, transforming the same square footage into entirely different locations on screen. This approach did more than just save money. It gave the film a unified visual identity that subtly reinforces the story's sense of confinement and decay. The concrete floors, exposed pipes, and industrial textures naturally bled into the production design, making every environment feel cold, oppressive, and slightly unstable. Fact number 4. This franchise started as a $5,000 short film nobody wanted to fund. Before Saw ever became a feature film, it existed as a short proof of concept created by James Wan and Leigh Whannell in 2003. With only a few $1,000s, roughly $5,000 by most estimates, the pair shot a short scene designed to demonstrate the tone, tension, and core idea of the story. Leigh Whannell even appeared on camera as a hospital orderly trapped in a crude version of what would later evolve into the reverse bear trap. That short wasn't made for audiences. It was made as a calling card to convince producers that this strange, uncomfortable concept could actually work as a full movie. Studios were hesitant. The material was dark, violent, and risky, especially coming from unknown filmmakers without a track record. But eventually, the short landed in the right hands and helped secure the funding needed to move forward. Without that tiny, low-budget experiment, Saw likely never would have existed at all. Fact number 5. The dead body in the bathroom was actually alive the whole time. One of the most unforgettable images in Saw is the corpse lying motionless on the bathroom floor between the two chained men. For most of the movie, that body feels like nothing more than unsettling background dressing, until the shocking reveal that it was John Kramer himself, the real Jigsaw killer, watching everything unfold. What many viewers don't realize is how physically demanding this role actually was for actor Tobin Bell. Bell spent long stretches of filming lying perfectly still on a cold, uncomfortable floor under hot production lights, sometimes remaining motionless for hours between takes. Any visible movement, a breath, a twitch, a blink, could ruin the illusion and force a reset. To maintain that level of control, Bell relied on meditation techniques to slow his breathing and keep his body calm, essentially turning himself into a living prop for much of the shoot. Fact number 6. The reverse bear trap was a real working machine. The reverse bear trap is one of the most disturbing images ever put on screen in a mainstream horror film, and part of what makes it so effective is that it wasn't just a hollow prop made to look dangerous. The device was actually built as a functional mechanical rig, designed to open and close in a controlled way so the camera could capture real movement instead of relying on visual effects or editing tricks. Safety mechanisms were built in, of course, but the weight, tension, and proximity of the metal jaws were very real for the actor wearing it. Shawnee Smith, who played Amanda, has openly talked about how unnerving it felt to have the device strapped to her head, even knowing it was engineered to be safe. When Amanda screams, gasps for breath, and frantically digs through her trap on screen, much of that panic isn't acting. It's a natural response to being physically restrained inside a heavy mechanical device under hot lights with a full crew watching every move. Fact number 7. She almost quit the movie because the script disturbed her so much. Before Shawnee Smith ever stepped onto the set, her first reaction to the script was to say no. She wasn't a horror fan, and the level of brutality, psychological stress, and moral darkness in Saw genuinely unsettled her. In early interviews, Smith has described reading the screenplay and finding it so disturbing that she initially refused the role outright, unsure if she even wanted to be associated with a project that pushed audiences that far outside their comfort zone. What ultimately changed her mind wasn't money or pressure, it was seeing the original short film created by James Wan and Leigh Whannell. Watching the proof of concept helped her understand the artistic intention behind the discomfort. It wasn't violence for shock value alone. It was tension, character psychology, and moral consequence woven into a tightly controlled cinematic experience. Once she grasped that vision, she agreed to take the role of Amanda, a decision that would end up defining much of her career and making her one of the franchise's most recognizable characters. Fact number 8. That screaming foot scene hurt more than you think. One of the most infamous moments in Saw occurs when Dr. Lawrence Gordon realizes the only way to escape the bathroom is to remove his own foot. The sequence is staged with brutal restraint, allowing sound design, performance, and imagination to do most of the work rather than explicit gore. What many viewers don't realize is that actor Cary Elwes experienced a real minor injury during filming. While working with the prop saw, he accidentally scraped and scratched his foot, triggering genuine pain in the middle of the take. Although the injury itself wasn't serious, the reaction you see on screen carries a level of authenticity that can't be fully manufactured. The shock, tension, and physical discomfort fed directly into Elwes' performance, intensifying the emotional weight of the scene. It's one of those moments where the boundary between acting and reality briefly blurs, reminding you just how physically demanding even controlled movie violence can be. Fact number 9. Many of the torture tools you're seeing are real medical instruments. Adding to the unsettling realism of Saw is the fact that many of the tools used throughout the film weren't fabricated movie props at all. A number of the surgical instruments and medical implements were real items purchased directly from medical supply sources. Scalpels, clamps, trays, and other equipment were authentic, lending an uncomfortable layer of credibility to scenes that already pushed viewers to their limits. Even when the traps themselves were exaggerated or stylized, the surrounding tools grounded the visuals in reality. Audiences subconsciously recognized the shapes and textures of real medical equipment, which triggers a deeper emotional response than purely fictional designs ever could. Fact number 10, they didn't even have enough footage to finish the movie. One of the biggest hidden challenges during production was coverage, simply getting enough usable footage to properly assemble the movie in the editing room. With such a tight schedule and limited resources, director James Wan and his team often had to move on from scenes before capturing every angle they ideally would have wanted. When editor Kevin Greutert began assembling the film, there were gaps that couldn't be filled with traditional coverage alone. Instead of letting those limitations cripple the project, the filmmakers leaned into creative problem solving. Still photographs, rapid montages, surveillance-style footage, newspaper clippings, and stylized transitions were woven into the edit to bridge missing material and heighten tension at the same time. What started as a necessity evolved into a defining stylistic choice that gave Saw its fractured, nerve-rattling rhythm. Fact number 11. Actors went home covered in blood because there was no time to clean them. Working on a film with such a tight schedule meant that even basic comforts had to be sacrificed in the name of efficiency. There simply wasn't enough time or budget to completely reset makeup between every shooting day, especially when scenes required heavy blood, grime, and sweat continuity. In many cases, actors would wrap filming still covered in fake blood and dirt, knowing they would return the next morning to continue the same scene with only minor touch-ups rather than full cleanups. This unusual workflow created a strange psychological effect on set. Cast members have described going home feeling like they were still trapped inside the world of the film, unable to fully separate themselves from the physical grime and emotional intensity of the material. While it may sound uncomfortable, this constant immersion actually helped preserve continuity and realism on screen. Fact number 12. Jigsaw was cast for one terrifying reason most viewers never notice. Tobin Bell didn't land the role of Jigsaw because of elaborate makeup, flashy screen presence, or dramatic physicality. In fact, in the first film, he barely appears on screen at all in a recognizable way. What director James Wan was truly drawn to was Bell's voice, calm, controlled, and quietly authoritative in a way that feels both soothing and deeply unsettling at the same time. That vocal presence became the emotional backbone of the character. The recorded tapes don't rely on shouting, exaggerated villainy, or theatrical menace. Instead, they deliver cold, measured instructions with a strange sense of moral certainty, which makes the traps feel even more disturbing. Bell's voice suggests intelligence, patience, and absolute conviction, forcing the audience to confront the idea that this killer genuinely believes he is doing something meaningful. Fact number 13. Cary Elwes secretly studied doctors to sell the performance. Playing a believable surgeon required more than just memorizing lines and wearing a lab coat. To make his character feel authentic, Cary Elwes reportedly spent time studying medical behavior, terminology, and the way doctors communicate under pressure. Even small details, how a physician holds instruments, how they speak to patients, and how they process stressful decisions, can subtly affect how believable a performance feels on screen. That attention to realism helped ground the character in a story that otherwise veers into extreme psychological territory. Dr. Gordon doesn't feel like a cartoon version of a doctor. He feels like a professional man slowly unraveling under impossible circumstances. The credibility of his medical knowledge and demeanor makes his eventual desperation even more unsettling because the audience senses how far he has fallen from logic and control. Fact number 14. Nobody can agree where the iconic pig mask came from. The pig mask has become one of the most recognizable images associated with Saw, appearing in marketing, sequels, costumes, and fan culture around the world. Yet strangely, its exact origin story remains inconsistent depending on who tells it. Some accounts suggest it was inspired by childhood memories and symbolic imagery tied to themes of rebirth and judgment. Others claim it was a late-stage creative decision that emerged from production design experimentation rather than a deeply planned concept. What everyone agrees on is that the pig mask wasn't a major focal point in the earliest drafts of the script. Its prominence grew organically during production, eventually becoming an accidental visual signature for the franchise. Fact number 15. Major studios rejected this movie. Before Saw ever terrified audiences, several major studios passed on the project. The concept was considered risky, too dark, too violent, and too unconventional to justify the investment. Without proven filmmakers attached and without recognizable franchise value at the time, the movie simply didn't fit comfortably into traditional studio expectations. Eventually, the project found support through Evolution Entertainment and what would become Twisted Pictures, who were willing to take a chance on the unproven filmmakers and their disturbing vision. That decision paid off spectacularly. As Saw exploded at the box office and generated massive cultural buzz, those early rejections became a textbook example of how unpredictable audience demand can be. Fact number 16, a Hollywood A-list star quietly joined this micro-budget horror film. When audiences first saw Danny Glover appear in Saw, many were surprised to recognize a major Hollywood star in such a gritty, low-budget horror project. Glover was already firmly established as a leading man through blockbuster franchises like Lethal Weapon, where he had commanded multi-million-dollar paychecks and global box office success. Yet here he was, stepping into a small independent production with unknown filmmakers and a fraction of the resources he was accustomed to. While exact salary figures for Saw were never publicly disclosed, his involvement added instant credibility to the project. His presence helped legitimize the film in the eyes of distributors, investors, and even skeptical audiences who might otherwise have dismissed it as just another obscure indie horror experiment. Glover's grounded performance also anchored the procedural elements of the story, giving the investigation storyline a sense of realism and emotional weight that balanced the more extreme trap sequences. Fact number 17. The director was barely out of film school when he made this. James Wan was only in his mid-20s when he co-created and directed Saw, making the film his feature-length directorial debut. For most filmmakers, getting a single movie off the ground can take decades of failed pitches, rejected scripts, and stalled projects. Wan, however, stepped directly into one of the most demanding genres in cinema with almost no margin for error. That youth and inexperience arguably worked in his favor. Without entrenched habits or rigid expectations, Whannell approached the project with fearless experimentation, blending gritty realism, stylized editing, and psychological tension in ways that didn't follow traditional horror formulas at the time. The success of Saw launched one of the most remarkable directing careers in modern genre cinema, eventually leading him to helm massive franchises like The Conjuring, Fast and Furious 7, and Aquaman. It's rare to see a first feature open so many doors so quickly, making Saw not just a horror milestone, but a career-defining breakthrough. Fact number 18. The music that makes every plot twist hit harder came from 9 Inch Nails. A huge part of Saw's emotional impact comes from its aggressive, pulsing musical score, which builds tension relentlessly and then explodes during the film's now legendary final reveal. That iconic sound was crafted by composer Charlie Clouser, a former member of the industrial rock band 9 Inch Nails during the 1990s. His background in layered electronic textures and unsettling rhythms translated perfectly into the film's escalating sense of dread. The track most audiences instantly recognize is Hello Zepp, which has since become inseparable from the franchise's identity. Whenever that music begins to rise, viewers instinctively know that a twist is coming. The piece has appeared in every subsequent installment, evolving slightly over time while preserving its emotional punch. Clouser's contribution didn't just enhance the movie, it helped create one of horror cinema's most recognizable audio signatures, proving that sound design and music can be just as powerful as visuals when it comes to shaping audience memory. Fact number 19. One of the stars actually sued the producers over the profits. Despite the enormous success of Saw, not everyone walked away from the experience feeling fairly compensated. In 2005, Cary Elwes filed a lawsuit against the producers, claiming he had been promised a percentage of the film's profits but ultimately received only a small fraction of what he believed he was owed. The dispute centered around back-end participation, a common but often contentious practice in Hollywood contracts. The case was eventually settled out of court, and the exact terms were never publicly disclosed. While legal disputes like this are not uncommon in the film industry, the lawsuit highlighted the enormous financial gap between the movie's tiny production costs and its massive box office earnings. It also underscored how complicated profit participation can become once a low-budget project unexpectedly turns into a global phenomenon. Interestingly, despite the dispute, Elwes later returned to the franchise years later for Saw 3D, suggesting that time, and likely negotiations, helped smooth over the conflict. Fact number 20. The writer wasn't a filmmaker at all when this story was created. Before Saw ever entered production, Leigh wasn't established as a screenwriter or filmmaker. He was working in Australian media as a television reporter and film critic, analyzing other people's movies rather than making his own. Alongside James Wan, he developed the original concept as a creative experiment rather than a calculated career move. That outsider perspective may have helped shape the film's unconventional tone and structure. Without being deeply embedded in traditional studio thinking, Wan and Whannell felt free to take creative risks that more seasoned professionals might have avoided. The result was a story that felt raw, unpredictable, and uncomfortably intimate, qualities that resonated strongly with audiences hungry for something different. It's a fitting way to close the journey of Saw, reminding us that groundbreaking cinema often comes from unexpected places and untested voices willing to gamble everything on a bold idea. If you enjoyed diving into the twisted history behind Saw, make sure to hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next deep dive into another iconic film. And let me know in the comments which movie you'd like to see covered next. The more bizarre, the better. Your suggestions help shape this channel, and you might just see your pick featured in an upcoming episode. Until next time, keep digging into the stories behind the screen.